Feminist Climate Action International Development Week event. My name is Hilary Clauson, and I'm Senior Policy Advisor with the Equality Fund. The Equality Fund sustainably resources women's rights organizations and feminist movements through global grant-making, gender lens investing, feminist philanthropy, and policy advocacy. Launched in 2019, with thanks to Global Affairs Canada for its investment, the Equality Fund has moved $100 million to over 1,000 women's rights organizations working across 100 countries. It is my pleasure to share this space with the Global Alliance for Green and Gender Action and Global Affairs Canada. My co-moderator is Noemi Gruter from Gaga, whom we will hear from shortly through the magic of Zoom. I acknowledge with gratitude that we are on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. The Equality Fund works in relationship with Indigenous-led organizations to resource their work abundantly and use our global platforms to learn from, amplify, and support Indigenous leadership. I am particularly grateful for this leadership in the climate action space, including from an incredible organization we will hear from today. This event will showcase the multi-sectoral, sustainable, scalable outcomes of Global South women's rights organizations and women-led community-based organizations working at the intersection of climate justice and gender justice. We do so today to celebrate their work and the funding partnerships that make it possible, and to encourage funders to ensure that climate finance reaches the grassroots. Today's conversation will be in English with French and Spanish interpretation available online. It is now my distinct pleasure to invite Anita van den Veld, Parliamentary Secretary to the International Development Minister, to give opening remarks. Parliamentary Secretary van den Veld was first elected as Member of Parliament for Ottawa West Nepean in 2015. She is an international expert on democracy and human rights. She has worked in over 20 countries on inclusive governance and women's leadership, including with the United Nations Development Programme and Organization for Security and Cooperation. Parliamentary Secretary, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. It is so wonderful to be here on this very cold winter morning on the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people, which was always a gathering place. So it's fitting that we are all gathering here today. Je suis très heureuse d'être parmi vous pour cette célébration de la Semaine internationale du développement. Et c'est le 35e anniversaire de cet événement. So the 35th, I believe, anniversary of International Development Week, which is a really important week so that those who are practitioners in the field of development can actually speak to Canadians and make sure that people understand how development, how it interacts with our lives, but also the incredible good work and the good stories that all of you do. And that's why it's so wonderful to be here with, I'm going to get it wrong, the Global Alliance for Green and Gender Action. Yes. There we go. And of course, the Equality Fund, which really is a model. If you think about how all of the values that we have, we talk about localization, we talk about grassroots and feminism, our feminist international assistance policy, which is founded on the idea that we don't do anything without not only asking, but fully integrating women and girls in not just as beneficiaries, but in the design and the development, in the actual implementation of projects. And we all know, and those of us who've worked with big organizations like I did with UNDP, that while those organizations do incredibly important work, dollar for dollar, you get far more when the money is in the hands of the local women and girls in their communities. And you also know that when that funding goes to women and girls, that funding goes to the entire community. I like to say sometimes that when people say, what is FIAC? Why is it always feminist? Why do you have to always say, aren't you going to help the men too? I get that, believe it or not, at the doors. And what I always say is that in every village, somewhere, whenever you have a failed development project, You have a group of women there that are saying, Chief, they only asked us, we told them it wasn't gonna work. This is about asking them, and not just asking, but entirely giving the empowerment into the hands of the women for whom they know what they need and for whom it actually matters the most. So I'm so pleased because the Equality Fund as a financing mechanism is probably one of the most innovative funds. We gave, of course, 300 million initially, but being able to use that to leverage other funding and make sure that it goes to the grassroots women-led organizations, the women's rights organizations on the ground, which is something that's very difficult for a bureaucracy to do. As wonderful as GAC is, to give those small grants that mean so much to some small organization is very difficult in that kind of machinery. So being able to establish things like the Equality Fund, like if we say GAGA, G-A-G-G-A, is a way to do that. And so I am really excited today to just hear your stories and to see the impact that this work is having and to rededicate ourselves to make sure that we continue doing this, that we continue making sure that it is those that are most impacted who are the ones that have their say in how our funds are going to be managed, and also in ensuring that in the future we don't need to have development funding because it's going to create a world where that won't be needed anymore. Sadly, I think right now, and I just want to add this myself, that we're in a situation globally and also in the south of us where it's going to be challenging. I know that you are all probably having a little bit of, sense of futility. And the one thing that those that oppose feminism, those that oppose development, one thing that they want is for us to cave to futility, to the idea that it's such a big problem, we can't do anything. I'm here to tell you that all of us working together, the fact that you're here in this room, this is how we stay strong. This is how we make sure that we don't give in to those kinds of forces that are trying to take us backward. And I just want to say how proud I am to see all of you here in this room, because I know that you care, and every one of you is making a difference, and all of your partners are making a difference, and just don't stop. We are here, the government of Canada is here to support you, and what you're doing has real impact. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Parliamentary Secretary, on your leadership in feminist international systems and sharing those important messages. We, of course, wholeheartedly know the power of getting funding to grassroots feminist organizations. Thank you for noting that it is challenging for a large bureaucracy, but today is celebrating that it is happening through lots of mechanisms, including the Equality Fund and GAGA. So to continue with our packed agenda, we will now hear about GAGA, the Global Alliance for Green and Gender Action, and its partnership with Global Affairs Canada. So we have Karen Van Boxtel online. She is the Executive Director of Both Ends and a GAGA Steering Committee member. Karen, with a background in international development studies and experience in Senegal, Burundi, and Cameroon, started at Both Ends in 2015 on sustainable land use and management. Shortly after, she became project leader of the Fair, Green, and Global program, with which she also broadened her focus to public financing and fair trade. Karen is also active in funder networks and closely follows political and policy developments in The Hague. Karen, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. My name is Karen. I'm very happy to welcome you at this event during the International Climate Week, and International Development Week, but we talk about climate. To at least definitely say that this is a fantastic collaboration between Equality Fund and the Global Alliance for Green and Gender Action. I work myself with the environmental justice organization Both Ends as executive director, and also in that identity I am a member of the steering committee of the Global Alliance for Green and Gender Action, which has indeed the lovely abbreviation GAGA. I want to take a moment in here to also show the facts and numbers of what we're actually talking about, because they are quite mind-blowing in a negative way. Overall, where we see the proportion of the population that is displaced by climate change, women represent 80% of the population displaced by climate change. And that is a lot. That is a lot. And just 10% of the traceable climate finance, which is meant to help these people, support people, from international climate funds is actually earmarked for local activities and ends up in the hand of local people. This is quite a discrepancy, and I'm also happy that through the Gaga Alliance, over 35 million euros was channeled in flexible funding to local women-led groups working at the intersection of gender, environmental, and climate justice. And that is at the heart of the Gaga Alliance and what we do. And that is also what we'll be continuing to do, because these numbers remain important, as in these times, we really need to be very clear about why and what we are doing and why it is important. And because although these numbers actually really confront us with the huge injustices that women face in climate change, the numbers also show the pathway towards what we can do and that we can do it. And that is actually all about locally led, gender just climate actions and the solutions which tackle not only the impacts, but the root causes of the climate crisis. This support and collaboration on locally led, gender just climate action and solutions have various dimensions. Within the Gaga Alliance, we do this in terms of resourcing, which is one of the important elements, of course, as the earlier data show how women are actually disproportionately affected by climate change. But at the same time, the resources of this climate change or philanthropy actually end up very limitedly in the hands of these women. And that is something that we need to turn around. And another dimension of this support is very much about networking, about movement building, to foster trust in collaborations, but also to link and learn with each other, to create a network, to build across movements. Because here within the Gaga Alliance, we've learned that environmental justice organizations, climate organizations, and feminist movements, women's movements, are actually, when they collaborate, they have a much, much stronger voice. But support is also in terms of care. When, for instance, women or organizations they work with are at risk, which is oftentimes definitely the case. And it also is about opening up spaces and sharing concerns in important decision-making spaces. Having the voices of women really represented at different policy levels, at the UNFCCC COPs, for instance, at the Green Climate Fund, or at investors' tables, which are, for instance, based in the Global North. Supporting all this whole package, actually means building power with women for climate action. That is what this session is about. And it's also what Gaga is about. Building power, having a stronger voice. As Gaga Alliance, we are fully committed to continuing these efforts. Especially in these times, it remains so important to have these strong networks. And together with Fundo Centroamericano de Mujeres, FECAM, as lead of the Alliance of Gaga, and Marrakesh and both ends as alliance partners, we look very much forward to continue to join forces with women's and environmental funds, NGOs, and women-led community-based organizations to really strengthen the nexus of women's rights, climate, and environmental justice. We are then also very pleased to do that together with the Climate Finance Department of Global Affairs Canada since 2022. Within this partnership, Climate Finance supports 100 to 150 women-led organizations. And we look forward to the continuity of this partnership, as well as welcoming other bilateral donors to join these efforts and support mechanisms such as Gaga through climate finance in order to build power with women for climate action. I wish you all a very inspiring session with a wide range of interesting speakers which are programmed for you.
Thank you so much, Karen, for these insights of the work of the Global Alliance for Green and Gender Action and the partnership we have with Global Affairs Canada. Hello, everyone. I'm Noemi Grützer, and I'm the Alliance Coordinator of the Global Alliance for Green and Gender Action, coming from the other side of the world and joining in here online. I'm co-moderating and co-hosting this event today with Equality Fund and Hilary, who is with you in the room. So in the next hour or so, we will hear in turn from feminist activists representing organizations in the Philippines, in Brazil, in Malawi, as well as from Global Affairs Canada. We will have then a discussion among panelists, followed by a question and answer, Q&A. So please write down your questions and have them ready for this short session with question and answers. We will begin in the Philippines, where it is coming up on midnight. So thank you so much, Judy, for joining us at this late hour. Judy Pasimio is a feminist, women's and Indigenous people's rights advocate, and also a mother of a smart and compassionate teenager. She is the co-founder and overall coordinator of LILAK, Purple Action for Indigenous Women's Rights. LILAK is a collective of women human rights activists and Indigenous women working to further Indigenous women's struggle to their rights, lands, and access to natural resources. Judy, we would love to hear from you. What are some of the actions LILAK is taking and the results you are seeing in terms of Indigenous women's leadership in climate solutions? And secondly, we know that LILAK works across movements, human rights movements, feminist movements, Indigenous movements, environmental justice movements. What are the advantages of working in this way, and how are you doing this? Over to you, Judy.
Thank you, Noemi. Good evening. Well, good morning. Good day to everyone. First, I think I'd like to put ourselves in the context where Philippines is. The Philippines is the most at-risk country to natural disasters and climate change in the whole world. And this is according to the 2024 report of the World Risk Index. In fact, just last year, in 2024, between late October and mid-November, the Philippines was hit by 6 consecutive tropical cyclones, 3 of which were called in our language here in the Philippines super typhoons. This caused widespread flooding, landslides in several provinces. These typhoons reportedly affected cumulatively 15 million people, with 600,000 displaced in just a month. In the direct Indigenous communities in between these typhoons, severe drought was also experienced. This series of typhoons, which are called supercharged by climate change, have undermined the capacity of Indigenous communities to recover from the onslaught of each of these disasters. Even for a disaster-prone country such as Philippines, what happened last year was unprecedented. While everyone recognizes that we are indeed in climate crisis and everyone is working towards climate solutions, but women from rural and Indigenous communities are further being put in very vulnerable positions with these so-called climate solutions. One of these is the transition to green energy. This is the justification for the aggressive push for more large-scale mining in the country. Philippines is one of the, if not the largest, exporter of nickel ores and concentrate in the world. Nickel, as we know, is a critical mineral in the production of low-carbon technologies such as solar panels, wind turbines, and nuclear plants. But it is most important in the battery production. The largest nickel mining in the Philippines is in Palawan, which is the home to Indigenous peoples in largely an agricultural land. So these so-called climate solutions are causing more harm than good to the rural and Indigenous women, causing more food insecurity, livelihood displacement, and yes, environmental destruction. And so one of the urgent tasks that LILAK, Purple Action for Indigenous Women's Rights, my organization, has taken on, along with the Indigenous women partners, is challenging these false solutions and exposing how these are benefiting the corporations and the governments, which, to begin with, are the main culprits of climate crisis. The Indigenous women are taking spaces of resistance at the community level to the national level. They led people's barricades in different provinces where mining is being forced in the communities, like in Didipio, Nueva Vizcaya, in Sibuyan Islands, and in Palawan Island. And it is this task, this obligation that they have. The Indigenous women face a lot of challenges, threats, as has been mentioned earlier, and harassment, made up cases against them. As per Global Witness, Philippines has the highest number of killings within the region of land rights defenders, and most of them are Indigenous peoples. Still, especially the women, they persist with this, knowing what is at stake: their access to natural resources, their livelihoods, and our futures. On the other hand, the other task that they have uh, is pushing for an alternative vision of climate solutions. With our community-based learning sessions, discussions with different members of the social movements, these have equip the Indigenous women leaders to take on the lead for pushing for these alternative visions. We are currently continuously doing documentation of the traditional and women-led farming practices and food production, and the promotion of food sovereignty as an advocacy. This then takes center stage in the struggle of Indigenous women towards a shift from corporate-led development and utilization of natural resources to community-centered food production and nurturing and sustainable relationships with nature and the environment. Um, and it is these struggles of the Indigenous women that require to be actively part of the movement building, the and to be part of the different formations at the local as well as at the national, and slowly now at the international level. The multiple crises that we are in cannot be seen just from one angle or with one perspective. The crisis that we are all in, food, climate, human rights, are experienced by everyone but in varying degrees and in different ways given our intersectional identities. The solutions then and the strategies with which we can achieve these solutions should be multifaceted and in consideration of our diverse positions. This diversity is our strength as we act collectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy, for those incredibly powerful remarks, for your leadership within LILAK, for supporting Indigenous leadership. Thank you for taking us to that local context of the Philippines in such rich detail, but also explaining how important it is for Indigenous women leaders to speak out, to show, to reveal the falsity of these status quo solutions and how there's another way possible. So looking forward to hearing more from you as we proceed. I'd now like to turn to Vanessa Purper, Program Manager for Fundo Casa's Gender and Climate Program. Vanessa is a public relations practitioner who's taught at the university level and worked for NGOs and international networks focused on the strategic use of information and communication technologies. Fundo Casa is a powerful support network for civil society initiatives across South America that promote environmental conservation and sustainability, democracy, and socio-environmental rights. Vanessa, Fundo Casa has been part of the Global Alliance for Green and Gender Action since 2016 as a partner fund, supporting community-based organizations in Brazil. We would love to hear from you how socio-environmental funds like yours are able to support women-led community-based organizations working on climate mitigation and adaptation. As well, how do you perceive the scalability of gender-just climate solutions? Can you give us an example?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to be here and share some insightful thoughts with all of you. Let me present myself for those visually impaired. I'm a white woman with curly hair. I have some highlights. I'm wearing specs and wearing a black dress. I'm connecting today from a traditional land from Ya and Tecoha Guarani community in the very south of Brazil, which I'm very proud of. Wow. It's an honor and a pleasure to have been following the activities of Casa, Social Environmental Fund within Gaga Alliance from its very beginning. From 2016, we've been grant making in the intersection of gender and climate, gender and environmental rights in South America for Gaga 1, which ran from 2016 to 2020. Casa was the social environmental fund responsible for grant making in Paraguay and Bolivia. And from 2010-21 onwards, up to late 2025, we are grant making in Brazil. And that's because now we have the climate perspective overarching our strategies and initiatives. One thing that we've learned from being at Gaga, we knew it before, but with less openness and I can say with a little bit less detail because we weren't just looking, is how important women is for protecting the environment, the traditions, and the communities, and protecting the climate regulating biomes in the whole world. Casa is turning 20 years this year, and we were born from the social environmental activists within Brazil, in our country. It's been quite a while that we've been working to push and combine the social work and the environmental work into one, because we understand that we cannot detach women's rights, and environmental rights. And we truly believe that the protection of climate regulating biomes, ecosystems, and all the efforts we can do to have less impacted climate in the whole world needs to include local solutions from people and communities from the territories that are the most impacted because of all the climate challenges we have. For example, yesterday, a city about 300 kilometers where I'm calling from was the hottest place on Earth. And the feel was around 60 degrees Celsius. And just the other day, about a couple of ago, the very same area of the world was hit by floods, severe floods, as much as those Judy was just telling us about. And how we understand this scale when we are talking about climate financing, and especially climate financing women leading global climate solutions that are gender just, fair, and more inclusive. Whenever we talk about scalability and investment, return on investment, we usually tend to go to a road that only mention local communities and doesn't really include the communities who are the ones best prepared to respond to climate imbalances, especially when we are talking about environment and social injustices. So because of the system, the methodology Casa Fund created to really put funds, financial funds and other resources in the hands of the most prepared communities to deal with those environmental injustices and imbalances, we understood that we would need a bigger and stronger alliance and community of funds that have the same vision of inclusiveness, equity, justice, and respect for those working in this intersection, in this agenda. And so when Gaga started, we also started to push the creation of as many social environmental funds in the global south that we could. And I must say that I'm very, very honored to tell you that we were successful in this effort. And we are now a global alliance of social environmental funds, Alianza Socioambiental Fondos del Sur. I invite everyone to visit our website and read Voices of the South, which is our latest publication, to understand a little bit more who we are and how we act. So we are a global South structure of locally led social environmental funds that take into its operations the perspective of inclusion, justice, and the approach that it's much easier, efficient, and prosperous to fundraising local currency via funds that really know the realities of the places that they belong, that can communicate with groups on the ground doing the real and most efficient work to protect the environment, the biomes, and the climate regulating ecosystems that we have in the global south. We are now 16 members of this alliance, and these structures working in an alliance have much more, have a proper manner to respond and to channel large amounts of funding, for example. If we take numbers and we compare all the funding for climate, for example, it usually gets concentrated in the north via INGOs, international NGOs, that costs a lot in operations, and actual resources reach very little groups on the ground, the ones that are really doing the work. Take Gaga, for example, and all the community-based organizations led by women, transvestites, intersex, girls, taking into account all the layers that we have when we are talking about inequity, injustices, and how disproportional it is, all the impacts we have over women and girls when we are talking about climate change and all the climate challenges we are having lately. So these funds have a structure that together combined, we can reach in a quick, efficient, and direct manner the real groups that are on the ground. And that is based on relationships that are built for many years. It's because the funds are led by activists that know the scenario, the territories, the needs each place has, and how to quickly organize and put down and lend resources to the real guardians of life's planet. I must say that whenever we read a report coming from one Gaga group supported via our environmental work, I get a sense of hope, and I renew my spirits to carry on in such a different scenario. And that is it's for a very specific reason that I invite everyone to ask yourself, what what does it mean, social injustice or climate injustice? Or what does it mean for you whenever you are coming from to be a person affected by climate change? It does change a lot if you are Afro-descended Quilombola women living in a forest in the southeast region of Brazil, for example. It's completely different if you are solo women living in the Philippines. In less than 1 month, there were at least 3 super typhoons that hit the communities. It's really different if you are indigenous women living in an area where the fire burned 80% of the land you used to survive. For many women in the world, protecting the environment is much more than a trend or something that we need to do. It's a matter of survival. It's a matter of existing and being alive. So I thank you everyone for the opportunity to talk to you guys, and I'm open to questions afterwards. Back to you, our moderators, Hilary and Noemi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Thank you for sharing your insights and years of experience in resourcing and grant making in the intersection of gender, climate, and environment as one of the 28 partner funds of the Global Alliance for Green and Gender Action since the very beginning, and explaining also the importance of building alliances and community of funds coming from the movements they serve and led by activists from communities. And also showing really that mechanisms to reach local women-led community-based organizations working on climate mitigation and adaptation actually exist, and they need to be resourced and supported. We now go over to the context of Malawi. We will bring in Joy, Hayley, Munthali. Joy is a youth activist and the founder of Green Girls Platform. Green Girls Platform is a female-led initiative that works to address the violence that girls and women face due to climate change in Malawi. And Joy is also an advisor for the Global Resilience Fund. She's also Malawi's youth delegate to COP25 in 2019, and nowadays actually negotiates for the Malawian delegation in UNFCCC negotiations, bringing in a feminist and youth voice. Joy, could you tell us about your work on movement building and youth organizing in Malawi, the work on increasing representation in climate negotiations, and explain the scalability of your work and the impact you are having with your work? Over to you, Joy.
Thank you, Naomi, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And as Naomi already said, my name is Joy Hayley Munthali, and I am from Malawi. And maybe just to give a bit of a context to the work that I do. So I founded Green Girls Platform in 2016. And that time I was in second year trying to figure out how I could bring in more girls into the climate change space. And I was very excited because I thought, well, this is like something that I'm passionate about, and I can bring in more girls because I am a girl, and they initially just say yes to coming to joining us. But what I found on the ground was completely different to what I perceived to be something that would happen initially. And so I would go into schools to educate girls and young women about climate change and what climate change is and why they have to care about the environment. And so I went to one school, I had 19 girls the first day. I went back the next week and I had 9 girls. And so I was really confused because I was doing really great work in my context. I thought I was doing really great work and that girls were actually listening to me and that we would really build a movement just because they were in the room. But then the next week I went, I found that I only had 5 girls. So that was like from 19 to 5. And I had to go back and think about what was I doing? Was the work that I was doing really important? Where was I going wrong? And I started asking questions, reaching out to girls and asking what is going on, because we had 19 girls and now we only have 5. And I first asked the teachers, and the teachers said, well, that's how it works. Girls are here in class this day, the next day they're not, and the numbers keep decreasing. And so I went into the communities to ask the girls that I had reached out to the first day. And so I would go door to door to all 19 houses just to check where they had gone. And so I found one girl at her house, and she was like, well, there is no point about me going back to school if every time I'm in class, I'm tired because I walked very long to draw water. I had to get firewood. And that's what I'm worrying about, that after I knock off from school, I have to go back home and get more firewood or get more water. And so when I go back to school and I feel I'm perceived as I'm not intelligent, but actually I am, but I don't have what I need to be in class. And I went to another girl who had been beaten on her way to draw water and had been beaten by her parents. And so all of that connected, and she couldn't go back to school. And so for me, that was like a wake-up call that maybe how I was organizing was doing things wrongly. And I had to listen more and talk more to girls to understand the issues that they had so that we could actually build something. And so from there, we would talk to them and see what were the issues that they were facing and how could we come up with solutions that would not only bring them back to school, but help them to live just like any other girl around the world. And so from there, that's when girls would say, well, I wish I had an alternative to cooking so I don't have to go and get firewood. And so what we would do is look for alternatives in the area for cooking. And if we found that, then that girl had no choice but to go back to school. And in that way, I saw that by just asking questions and listening, we actually got more girls to join the movement. Because then neighboring communities would ask, what are you doing that is different? What are you doing that now you don't have to go to draw water? And they're like, well, now we have a borehole. Now we have easy water access and we don't have to do it. We have to be in school. And so for me, it was just focusing on the needs that girls have and listening and continuing asking questions, because up to now, I still ask questions. But from those questions, we found that there is so much more to climate change than what we talk about, than what we learn in school, than what is discussed on negotiation tables. Because climate change is not only about how it's causing floods, how it's causing typhoons, but rather how is it affecting human beings? How is it affecting a girl in Malawi that knows nothing about driving a car or emitting anything? She's just a girl. And so now we work on finding solutions at a local level, finding solutions that work for girls and young women in Malawi, but also documenting the different violences that they're facing, the different issues that they're facing, so that we can use that to advocate for gender responsive policies and gender solutions that work for girls and young women in Malawi. And we bring that to our government and we talk to them that these are the solutions that we need. These are the policies that we need. We need actions that don't only work for the country, but work for girls and young women. And so at first we faced a lot of pushback, but after we were hit by Cyclone Freddy and a lot of people died, over 600 people died in Malawi, and most of the people affected were women and girls. And that made our case for us. And we're like, we have been talking about this for a very long time. It's about time we stop talking and we actually do something about it. And from there, well, when we were starting, there was only like me, and then I got 5 more girls to join me. And in 2021, we had a movement of over 1,000 girls trying to make change, trying to bring in the voices of girls and young women. And then in 2024, which was like our highlight year, we got to really convince the government to send more girls and young women to negotiation tables, not only in the country, not only bringing them to conferences in the country, but even bringing them to the negotiation tables at a global level. And that's what we've been doing to try to get things from the local level, trying to talk about girls and young women and the issues that they're facing at a local level and finding solutions that are working for them, to bringing those voices to a national table where the government can listen to us and come up with policies and solutions that are working for girls and young women. And then we get those voices and we go with them to global stages like the UNFCCC, where we're sitting down with other policymakers, world leaders, to make them understand why it is important to really focus on girls and really focus on young women, and to make a case on why it doesn't even have to be solutions that are coming out from anywhere, but that girls in their domain have the solutions, and we know what we want, and they know what works in their context. And just by listening and asking the right questions, we can actually come up with the best solutions that work for them. So we have been doing that work since 2018 up to date, and we have solutions that are working in the country. And then we have other people that come to us to learn how does this work? How do you do this? And our answers are always, we listen, we sit down, we talk to people, because we feel like the best solutions happen when we talk, when we listen, and we come up with something that works for everyone, but not only that's one-sided or something that only fits a certain policy or a certain funding, but rather something that you all have to sit down and co-create. So that's the work that I do with Green Girls and how it's been working. You know me.
Thank you so much, Joy. I think that was such a great example of why rights and climate have to be addressed in tandem, and how we might not know that, we might not know the intricacies, how we should respond unless we listen. So that was a really powerful example of showing us how important it is to listen. And sometimes we feel far away from girls and young women in rural Malawi. And so for you to put that energy into listening and bringing those stories to us is so much appreciated. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Connie Tulus, joining me in person, if you'd like to come to the table. Connie is a Deputy Director in Global Affairs Canada's Climate Finance Programming team. In this capacity, she is responsible for a portfolio of climate finance projects funded by Canada's 3 climate finance commitments. She's worked at Global Affairs Canada, formerly CEDA, for the last 18 years, working on a range of files from financing for development, blended finance, Asian development programming, and climate finance. Prior to this, Connie worked as an economist at the Department of Finance on a range of international trade and finance issues. Connie, Global Affairs Canada decided in 2022 to fund Gaga and therefore women-led community-based organizations and feminist movements like we've heard from today. What led you to this decision to fund through your climate finance portfolio? How do you see the outcomes of this partnership? What are your learnings and insights? And finally, what do you recommend to other bilateral donors interested in doing the same?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this important panel. I'm so excited to be here. And what I'm most excited about is to hear about your experiences and to really listen and to learn from your experience and the important impact that your organizations have had on gender just climate solutions. This is really my objective today. So I'm going to keep my remarks to a minimum so we have more time to listen from everyone. And I think hearing more about your work is really what makes us proud to be a partner of Gaga and the important work that they do. We've all heard it. Women are affected differently, disproportionately by the devastating impact of climate change. Every time we hear the news, we're reminded of how extreme weather events are happening everywhere, from storms, floods, heat, who are displacing thousands of people from their homes. And as we've heard also, 80% of people displaced by climate change are women and girls who face heightened risk of poverty and violence. Studies have also shown that women are 14 times more likely to die during natural disasters. And yet we know that including women, and we've heard it today, including women in climate decision-making processes can enhance the resilience and effectiveness of climate policies. This is what is at the heart of the Feminist International Assistance Policy, or the FIAP. This policy views women not just as beneficiaries, as our parliamentary secretary said, but as powerful agents of change in the fight against climate change and biodiversity loss. In 2020, when we were at the tail end of our last climate finance commitments, we decided to undertake consultations to inform the current climate finance commitments. In the end, we talked to over 500 people from over 300 organizations across 20 countries. Gaga was there, and you made a really important contribution to these consultations. Informed by these consultations in 2021, the Prime Minister announced a doubling of Canada's climate finance commitment. The goal of this new program is to support gender-responsive climate finance projects that help developing countries transition to low-carbon, climate-resilient, nature-positive, inclusive economies. Our climate finance program is grounded on a number of key principles, including advancing feminist climate action that supports the poorest and most vulnerable. And so for us, it was a natural choice to work with Gaga to ensure that climate action is inclusive, effective, and rooted in local realities. Though our partnership is still young, we've already learned a lot. One of the first things we learned, and we've heard it from our parliamentary secretary, is that it forces us to do things differently, to provide funding directly in the hands of local community-based organizations. We haven't done a lot of this in the past. We've experimented obviously with the Equality Fund, with Women's Voice and Leadership, and we certainly haven't done it with Climate Finance Program. It wasn't easy. We had a lot of tense moments and a lot of huddles on, okay, how can we get this done? But in the end, we did get it done. And it was because we knew we had to get it done because we knew that community-based organizations bring deep understanding of the local environmental challenges and cultural context, as well as Indigenous knowledge, traditional practices, and unique perspectives, which are key, especially to help the most vulnerable communities to build resilience and adapt to its impacts. Our partnership with Gaga has provided us with firsthand, on-the-ground insights on the experiences and challenges that women face from climate change, as well as the incredibly important work, as we've heard today, that are being carried out by women-led, community-based organizations to address climate change. We're proud of our partnership with Gaga for the Women Leading Climate Action Initiative. Even though it's early days, the initiative has done important work in strengthening the capacity of women-led CBOs to lead collaborative and inclusive lobbying and advocacy for gender-just climate solutions. And it has also improved access and engagement of women-led CBOs, human rights defenders in decision-making on climate policy. And this is only the beginning. We look forward to hearing the stories of the women and of the CBOs in the years to come. But as I said, I think I've said enough. I'm here to listen to your perspectives and your experiences on climate finance and how you think we as a donor could support the critical work that you do. So let me stop here and turn the floor over to you. Thank you again. Thank you, Connie.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Connie, for your insights and again for the important partnership we have with Global Affairs Canada. As you said, this is only the beginning, and this partnership between the Climate Finance Department of Global Affairs Canada and Gaga is really showcasing actually to the world that bilateral climate finance can directly support women-led community-based organizations working on climate mitigation and adaptation. And we really want to spread the words about this possibility and work with you and other bilateral donors to move ahead with this. Thank you also to all other speakers. And we got already many insights from all of you who are on the panel. We want to now have a moment to keep on having this conversation and maybe go in a little bit of depth about some of the issues. And therefore, we have 2 questions for every one of you. So please feel free to just jump in and provide us with your thoughts. One question we have is, why actually are women-led community-based organizations the most sustainable actors for climate mitigation and adaptation? And secondly, what advice do you have for funders to improve their resourcing via climate finance for gender-just climate solutions or to feminist movements? So these two questions, we just throw them into the panel, and whoever feels ready can go for it and take the floor.
If I may, yeah. No, I mean, listening to Vanessa and to Joy, the women at the grassroots level are in survival mode more than anyone else. They are desperately, consistently in search for ways to survive the next typhoon, the next flooding, the next drought. So they are not in the conversations and actions for climate mitigation and adaptation for projects or for short-term fundings. Their actions are actually propelled for the need to overcome these challenges for the present danger that they face, but also for the future that they want to build for their children and their communities. So they're here, they're experiencing these challenges, and they're here despite all the threats and harassments and killings and danger that their work entails and their struggle entails. They're here because of that vision of of a of a society that everyone would live in bounty, in with care for each other, and without fear for any backlash, for the protection of the environment that they do and for the protection of the lives within their communities.
Thank you so much, Judy. Vanessa.
Thanks, Naomi. I would like to address the question about what advice we give to funders to improve resourcing. I think the best thing is to invest in structures already in place that already have evidence of how it is efficient to fundraise women-led movements across the global south with this perspectives, right? First of all is the respect for the traditions, the knowledge, the solutions, and the capacities the groups have to decide on what to do, how to do it, considering climate and timing and the characteristics of the places they belong to. Also, structures such as GAGA and Global South, Social Environmental Funds of the Global South Alliance, for example, they are already prepared to receive large amounts of money and to put the money directly on the hands of women-led communities, working to guarantee climate and gender just solutions in their more than 50 countries in the world for now. Naomi can correct me if I'm wrong. So this is quick, this is efficient, this is low cost, and it's already there. And we have numbers to prove that it works. It's been working for the past 10 years. And the care we have doing this way is something you'll never find somewhere else. I can guarantee that. Thanks.
Yeah, and maybe I can just follow what Vanessa said. I will give a story because I think that's the best way I can communicate why it's important that we should fund women, but also why feminist movements are they are part of the gender just solutions. And so in 2023, when we were affected by a cyclone, we had one of our best projects in one area where they had a big farm. They had planted everything and things were growing. And they were so excited that we were going to harvest a lot of things, a lot of products. But then we were hit by a cyclone and everything was washed away. And I was really scared to go to that area because I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know how I could inspire them to start over. But when we went back, we found that they had already started building back. They had already started trying to bring the farm back to life. And when we asked the women and the young women, like, why do you want to do this again? And they said, where are we going to go? This is all we have. And that was the reason for us to work with them, because sustainability is having people that are willing to build that better. And women and girls are those kinds of people that will come back. They can come back from anything because then they're not there just for a project. They're there because they live there. That's their livelihood, and that's what keeps them sustainable. And their future generations depend on that. And one thing that has really worked for me, I started this work really young, and feminist movements understand. They really listen to you, and they're willing to work with you. They're willing to take the risk with you. Because after that cycle, we had almost every feminist organization that we're working with reach out to us and say, we saw this on the news. How are you? How are you feeling? How is your organization faring? And that is what all environmental defenders need, people that care enough to ask you, how are you? Most funders ask you, how much money have you spent? Where are you? Where is the report? But feminist movements will sit down with you and will ask you, how are you and how can we help? And I think that is what everybody, every young woman, every woman that is working in the environmental sector and conservation needs, people that give you space to care and space to rest. So I would say that is what we need. Feminist movements listen, and they are able to provide funding for gender just solutions just because they know, they understand what we're going through. And that is the whole reason why they need to be funded.
I'm really hearing that all of your organizations, of course, they're embedded in local communities. They know local needs. They have existed for many years, are now tackling perhaps the most existential crisis of our time, being the climate crisis, and often having to pivot. So they're doing the rights work, they're doing the long-term work, and then there are disasters that we keep hearing about, and they need to turn to those and address the immediate needs of women, girls, and gender diverse people in their communities, which brings to mind the kind of funding that should be provided to these organizations, being core, long-term, flexible, low burden for these organizations to continue to exist and respond and immediately meet needs as they arrive. So I just put that out there, and certainly Global Affairs Canada is providing that kind of assistance and encouraging other funders to do so.
Yeah, can I just jump in on that one? Yeah, like LILAK is an organization initially geared towards, and our skill set are towards education, community learning sessions, advocacy. But then when tsunami happened in, I think that was 2008, um, and our community partners were affected, we cannot just say, oh, no, we're not into relief or rehabilitation work. Uh, and so we had to, even if we ourselves were affected by that super typhoon, we had to uh, mobilize the resources that we have in providing very quick relief. That also happened in COVID lockdown, where the Indigenous women partners didn't have um, the sort access to their source of livelihood, the forests, the farms. They were Philippines has one of the longest and strictest lockdowns ever, and so we were then forced to gather our resources, negotiate. In fact, we didn't need to negotiate. We just needed to inform our feminist funders that this is the situation, and we had no problems diverting these resources, but and also the time that we spent in responding. And one other thing that we needed to step up was the response to women human rights defenders at risk. uh, we didn't have the resources to provide for sanctuaries. We didn't have the resources or the mental capacity and the emotional disposition to actually handle cases of women at risk. But this we did, and we're doing. And yeah, just to jump in on what Joy was saying, we are so lucky to have to be partners of Equality Fund and Gaga, because then we felt the trust. And I think that's one of the major things that feminist funds and feminist organizations try to build in this funding world, the trust. but most importantly too as well is solidarity. And so yeah, as we build our capacity to respond to these emergency, both climate but also attacks against women human rights defenders, we are fortunate to be in a funding community that is that trusts, that is in solidarity with us, and is part of the web of care that we're trying to build amongst our partners and amongst ourselves. So yeah, special shout out to Equality Fund and Gaga.
Connie, did you want to jump in, add anything?
I've taken a lot of notes. Thank you so much for your insights. I think we need to get these stories out there. We need to get the stories in a way that is easy to understand for everybody, so that we can, communicate with other funders, with other stakeholders in this space, and so we can amplify the work that you guys are already doing. So yeah, thank you so much for your insights.
I would say get the stories out there and really encourage climate funders to see the breadth of the challenge, the depth of the challenge. It's not only about technocratic solutions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but showing that it is about educating girls, it's about movement building, it's about tackling false solutions, questioning, interrogating this drive for a green energy economy and how that really impacts Indigenous people. It is incredibly broad, and yet it's these diverse women's organizations that are tackling every facet of it and need funding.
Yes, thank you, Hilary. Maybe we can also give the floor to Karen if you have any thoughts on the conversation and discussion here, and on what mentions Connie as well.
Yes, thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Naomi. It was lovely to hear all the thoughts sharing and exercise what we're doing here, because that's really at the core of climate action and where we need to go to. And at the core of climate action are, to me, those who experience the consequences of climate change, those who have the lived experience, those who care for the future and next generations, and those are women. So that is, to me, crystal clear out of this meeting, but also from the experience of Gaga over the last couple of 10 years. I think advice for funders, also being a funder within Gaga, but also working with funders, that it's what we've learned throughout the last couple of 10 years was that we started off in collaboration. We started off the Gaga Alliance in collaboration with funds, in collaboration with trust-based mechanisms, which are there already. And we knew that it was working because we weren't setting up something new. What was new to it was the Gaga Alliance, and that is the networking. That is bringing funds, bringing women's groups, bringing women-led environmental organizations together, bringing the climate movement and the gender movement together. And that was what was new. And looking back at that 10 years in collaboration within the Alliance, we changed. I think we changed year in and year out again, because we've got learnings. We've got learnings from the COVID periods. Not sure who was sharing thoughts about that, but the COVID periods put us in a position where we needed to act quickly, where we set up autonomy and resilience funds just very, very quickly, and which allowed us to channel funding to local women-led CBOs, feminist organizations who were at that moment in need of money without restrictions, and just to get the funding used for their resilience, for their food, for their household, for their livelihood, for what was urgent at that time. And I think that example of how Gaga initiated the Autonomy and Resilience Fund at a time when it was needed shows the flexibility and shows that within funding, feminist and climate funding, we need this kind of flexibility and also to renew again and again. And I think that is also what actually makes a reason to exist for Gaga, and what actually shows that the Canadian government is stepping in, that the Irish aid is stepping in, that FCDO is stepping in, and to broaden the success stories which are there and which happen on the ground, and mechanisms are there to support them. That is key. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you. And there is already a discussion happening in the virtual room, so in the chats, and I'd like to make it accessible for the people who are in the in-person room as well. So there is a question we can take now, and then we have again a moment later for questions. But there is an important question from Vincent from FCDO, so from a donor perspective, and he asks, is investing in existing structures allowing for expansion of those structures as they gain traction? I think many donors would be cautious about investing in fixed structures due to concerns about wider impact and cost effectiveness. If those structures allowed growth in that model, crowding in more community-based women's groups as they gained experience, evidence, and credibility, it would be more attractive to providing funding. And Vanessa is already responding, so I'd like to invite you, Vanessa, if you agree to share your thoughts with everyone.
Thanks, Naomi. Thanks, Vincent, for the question. Well, I truly believe that this type of structures that are very low cost in operations and high in donations and have the perspective of respecting the capacities of local groups to manage the resources themselves, to propose the solutions, to deal with receiving fair amount of funding to implement activities that are completely aligned with the real needs they have. It's really, really much more effective than applying funds in large international structures that we've seen are not really working. They are very high cost. No one from outside a place that has social, environmental, women rights problems will have the solution for those problems. It's really not possible. And investing in structures that have this vision that the solutions are in the same place where the problems are, it's much more effective. Money-wise, time-wise, we really don't have enough time to spend talking too much about what and how to do, especially if you want business as usual. It's not working, and the planet is burning, and we're not going to have a planet to live on if we don't act immediately. So I really believe that there are some structures in place that are proven to be much more effective than all the systems that we've been seeing in the philanthropic ecosystem lately. So it's something to be considered. We do have numbers, and there are many representatives here from different perspectives, but acting in the same frame and vision of this intersection and how it really works. The numbers from Gaga and from the Alianza, they are really, really huge. In a very short period of time, with lots of money, many thousands, hundreds of groups have received funds and are doing things that are changing lives and keeping people healthy and allowing them to live in their places and within their traditions and respecting the environment, especially. Thanks, Naomi.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, and giving the floor to Hilary back in the room.
Thank you, Noemi, and thank you all for those great interventions. We just thought we could wrap up the event before questions with a bit of a summary of an Equality Fund policy brief drafted in partnership with Mama Cash, who is also a member of Gaga. So I'll just ask Nicole to pop up a slide. But really, this brief is a summary of a lot of what we're hearing today in terms of the importance of women's rights organizations and feminist movements as instrumental climate actors, as well as offering a key mechanism for reaching them. Again, as we've heard, through scale, feminist funds, socio-environmental funds can reach the grassroots level for climate action. So we have some recommendations around, firstly, meeting the magnitude of the climate crisis with appropriate financing. We've heard a lot today about this difficult context, the reduction of aid budgets, but we will say loud and proud that we need climate finance, and we need climate finance dedicated to gender equality objectives as well. A second recommendation around increasing funding to grassroots feminist organizations, either directly or where not possible, through these mechanisms that exist. And you've heard from them today, and Fundo Casa is a wonderful example, Gaga is a wonderful example. There are many funds that are reaching the grassroots and that funders have been employing. And finally, deepening collaboration with feminist climate activists in climate finance discussions and decisions. So we certainly heard from LILAK about Indigenous women coming to the table from the local to the international level. We heard from Joy at the Green Girls platform about how young women and girls should be at these decision-making tables. So that's part of the scale piece as well. We're funding activists to influence policy globally and bring about transformative change. So now time for any further questions. Any questions in the room first? Still digesting? Anything online, Noemi? We can take a moment.
Yes, we have a question in the chat. The question is I have a question regarding how these grassroots movements exist at the community level. Are they met with hostility as we speak of protection of defenders? Are men involved in the movements? How can the movements go beyond engaging women and making everyone responsible for environmental justice without movements being dominated by men? And this question is coming from Susan Kozak. And yes, I think it's for everyone on the panel. Anyone who wants to go and respond to this.
Yeah. Hostility against Indigenous women human rights defenders come, unfortunately, from different angles. Of course, the primary would be coming from the corporations that they are opposing in entering their ancestral domain. So you have the mining companies, you have big plantations coming in, and even now the construction, the putting up of solar farms, which pushes the conversion of agricultural lands to solar farms. And these are also from the main corporations, which are also involved in the fossil fuel. So that hostility is coming from the corporations. But because the Philippine government value the so-called, not so-called, value their investments, even if we're at the losing end. The government has put up all of these paramilitary groups that hinder and perpetrates the violence against the communities. But unfortunately, some of the hostilities also come from the Indigenous leaders themselves, who are male-dominated. Because the women who fight against these corporations, against these projects, are usually not part of the consultation, are usually not part of the decision-making table. And so the conflict between the leaders who are male-led and the indigenous women who experience the difficulties in the daily lives have this conflict as well. So yeah, it's very, very challenging for the indigenous women leaders at the grassroots level.
Thank you so much, Judy, for sharing. I don't know if anyone else, Vanessa or Choi, you want to share as well on this?
Yes, sure. So in hostilities, yes. And I personally have met a lot of them, and that's because when we were starting our work in Malawi, people perceive girls as, I would say, powerless, that you can't influence change. And we had scenarios where people would chase us out of communities, where boys would throw stones at us in classrooms just because they were not involved in the lessons that we were providing. And so we got to a point where we had to leave one community and say we don't have to work with them because they're really hostile. But also we thought that they would be the best people to champion our initiative because their community had high child marriages. And so what we did was go to the leaders to really sit down with them and understand why they don't want us into their communities. And when we heard them, because they were arguing that we were going into the communities to teach children prostitution, but from our end, we were going in to provide climate education. And so we started providing examples of why our work was important and why we needed to be there. And so we gave them options that we're here because we want to provide climate education. And when we do this, girls will have solutions to climate change, but they'll also be in class. And when they're in class, these are the opportunities that you have in future. And so the chiefs understood us very easily that we were there for that reason, and we provided solutions to their problems. And so whenever we would go into the community, we would sit down with them and say, we're here because of this. And ever since then, we have really had male leaders that are really supporting the work that we do. And in all the communities that we work in, the leaders are all men, and they're helping us to reach more women, and they understand why our work is important. And so for us, it was sitting down and really trying to find ways in how we can work together. And because we know that people listen to men more than women in Malawi, and we wanted to have them as allies and not work against them. So that's one of the ways in how we have them working with us and really pushing the movement forward.
Thank you, Choi, for sharing your experience. And looking towards Hilary and the room, if there are any questions.
Yes, question?
Can I ask 2 questions, perhaps?
Sure, I'll just check on the volume. Can you hear online?
No.
I'll try to use a big voice.
Do you mind sneaking up to this? Is the microphone? Thank you.
Hi, so I have one question for you, Connie. Just how Canada is planning to mitigate or respond to the health impact of climate change and its climate finance. And then the question for the other panelists is just to ask how you're addressing or working with people with disabilities in those communities when you are working on all of these climate change initiatives.
Thank you very much. That is a very good question. Typically, you know, with our climate finance, because we adhere to the real markers, climate change, adaptation or mitigation principle, this hasn't been a focus, but we know that we need to turn our attention more and more to this. Obviously, you know, when we are working, for example, with partners who are working in, you know, whether it be mitigation in, you know, renewable energy or, you know, coal phase out or through GAGA, there are co-benefits for health. But this is, we recognize this is something that, you know, we need to pay more attention to.
So then maybe the second, sorry, maybe the second part of the question is really for the panelists as well, online joining, addressing the question about the work with people with disabilities. If Vanessa, Joy, or Judy, you want to share about your experiences and your work with people with disabilities.
Um, yeah, I have to admit that we don't have that much work with Indigenous women with disabilities. But 2 years ago, we did a national gathering of Indigenous women, and we were able to have working groups on different identities. We have Indigenous women farmers, we have Indigenous women youth, we have Indigenous women overseas workers, but we also have Indigenous women with disabilities. Um, it's a starting program to be able to understand what are the different challenges or specific challenges that they experience. And so, yeah, we haven't really gotten deep into that yet, which is in the pipeline. But I'd like to say that as part of the movement building, we are we are in partnership with different women, broader women's movements, and two of them would be women with disabilities, and together we worked in formulating a national report, shadow report on the status of women in CEDAW. But yeah, unfortunately, beyond that, there's nothing much that I can contribute to in terms of, very nuanced and detailed discussion of their situation.
Thank you so much for sharing, Judy. If Joy and Vanessa don't have anything on this particular topic, I give the floor back to the room to see if there is any other question. Vanessa, please go ahead.
Thanks, Naomi. Very briefly, it is people with disabilities. If we think about the impacts of climate emergencies, for example, it's a very severe impact on climate change and climate emergencies hit everyone, but the disproportion of the impacts of these emergencies over people with disabilities and women with disabilities is huge. And we see little to no funding available for initiatives willing to fund groups that are working with those issues. What we've been seeing is that it's more often in our call for projects, for example, a combination of vulnerable groups that include people with disabilities. For example, right now we are supporting a group from one of the most affected cities in Rio Grande do Sul, affected by the floods in May 2024. And this group particularly works hiring people with disabilities to work in the organization, bringing in the perspectives from a nuance of people that are working with on the ground along with the groups. And besides people with disabilities, they focus on women, trans, intersex, travestites, and specific those social and political groups that are very vulnerable and invisible for local governments, for example, and even worse, in a situation of an emergency flooding impact, how they were. So we are trying to include and combine as much as possible, and from what we've been hearing from the ground, from the groups themselves, which is a characteristic of our grant making. We do not set the agenda, the demands, the needs, what is more important, and how to apply resources. That comes from the groups, from the community-based groups led by people affected in these many layers of injustices. Thanks, Nami.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for sharing these important insights. And we are now at the end, actually, of this event. If there are any more questions in the room, we're happy to announce that you will have a reception, and Hilary will be there and can make any connections if you want to have any further conversations. But we will end here the event, and we want to thank everyone for joining us today in this important discussion from all parts of the world. How nice is it that we can connect also virtually together? And we hope that you all take away the stories of our panelists, the knowledge of the importance to support women-led grassroots organizations who are at the front line of the climate crisis. And also take away the confidence that climate finance can be used effectively by women-led community-based organizations and feminist movements to tackle the climate crisis. We have heard results are multi-sectoral, scalable, and we heard movements rooted in their own communities have contextual expertise, and this leads to sustainability of outcomes with solutions, climate solutions that are gender just, that are deep, that are empowering and lasting. Thank you, everyone. Let's stay connected here, all our social media handles and websites, and see you very soon. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Good night.
All right. Thank you for joining in person.